My name is Susie. I have been looking for a summer job for the last few weeks. And I finally found one. It was at a local clothes shop. I handed in my CV a week ago and got a call from the owner just when I finished school for the summer. Everything was looking up and I was really excited about starting my new job, which was at a local clothes shop. The owner, Martin, said he needed help around the shop, as his wife was visiting her family in New York. Luckily for me, she chose a good time to visit, as I got my summer job out of it. The job was okay, but nothing really fun-filled like I had hoped. Sometimes I thought I heard weird sounds. It was like weird banging or something. When I tried to figure out where it was coming from, it suddenly stopped. I put it down to rats or mice, but then again, it would be gross if they were around any shop. There was a big mirror in the middle of the shop, and I always felt weird passing it. I don't really know why, but things got a lot weirder when I realised the banging was coming from behind the mirror. I wondered, was there a room hidden behind it? And all sorts of crazy thoughts were running around my head. I often saw Martin, my boss, go into the storeroom, but he never left me near it. I couldn't open the door as I checked already and it was locked. I checked when he was out for lunch, so I thought to myself maybe I could have a chance if I had the key next time he goes out to lunch. The question was, how could I get to his wallet, because I knew that's where he kept the key, as I could always see him taking the key from his wallet. My curiosity was getting the better of me, so when he had his wallet on the inside of the counter, I quickly looked through it, and there was the key. I took it out just 5 minutes before he was going for lunch, and hoping he would not notice it gone. When Jack went out to lunch, I quickly opened the door and walked around the storeroom to where the mirror was. I was shocked to see a woman tied to a chair, gagged. I knew from a picture I had seen of his wife that it was his wife. I panicked, looking into her eyes that were filled with fear. I took the gag off her and asked her, was she okay? She said, "It's my husband. He's keeping me here as a hostage because I wanted to sell the store." I panicked with fear as Jack came back into the room holding a huge knife. Somewhere else a man was watching everything unfold online. Another man across the world was watching from his phone, while a man and woman were watching over in another part of the world. The wife smiled at her husband and kissed him. I was stunned. What is happening? Then he said to his wife, "You're always such a great actress. No wonder our viewers pay so much money to see me kill people." The wife said, "I must admit, I loved this one. You should have seen her face." I stood in shock, not knowing what was happening. I was shaking in fear, with Jack standing in front of me, wielding a knife, knowing now that it was all a setup and his wife had intentionally set the trap, using the sounds as a bait to get me to go into the room and investigate. I knew now that there were people who were paying to watch this couple kill people. I turned around, running for the door, and he ran after me, but luckily I was the best in my class at athletics and made it out the door and ran to safety. I will relax for the rest of the summer, as this experience frightened me from taking up a summer job for a very, very long time, as you can imagine. Hi, my name is Jake. I was looking for a roommate for the last 2 weeks, and finally I found one. I found it so hard to pay the rent on my own, so I was so thankful for the bill to be cut in half. I loved going to parties and having fun, and letting myself go every chance I could get. My roommate Simon prefers to stay in and work on his art. He goes to art college just like myself. He just sits all day painting. Sometimes I think he doesn't even eat. I was trying to get to sleep one night, and he was over by his bed with his bed lamp on, painting and sobbing. I asked him what was wrong. He told me he had no idea what he could paint to get the marks he needed for an upcoming exam. I wasn't any good at giving advice, but I tried my best. I walked over to him and said, "Look man, don't get too upset over it. Just do what you do, put your blood, sweat and tears into it." He said to me then, "I hope they like it, whatever it is I do." Then he said something weird. He asked me, why was it that whenever artists died, their work was appreciated much more? I didn't know what to say, so I just told him I didn't know. The next day, I was going out to a party. It was Friday, and I asked him did he want to go. He said to me no, and told me he has a good idea to get his work noticed, and said he was taking my advice and putting his blood, sweat and tears into it. I smiled at him, wishing him good luck. At about 3 a.m, I came into my room, very quiet not to wake him. I put on my bedside light, and what I saw on the wall made me nearly collapse with fright. There was writing written in blood on the wall. It said, "Thanks for your advice." Simon was lying dead underneath what was a painting of what looked like a forest, but it was painted in his blood. The blood was still dripping from the canvas. I froze in fear, thinking back to me telling him to put his blood, sweat and tears into it, and remembered him asking why were artists' work appreciated more after they died. A couple of minutes later, I rang the police and explained to them, and I waited for them to come. It was Sam's birthday, and he decided to celebrate it with just his sister and parents this year, because of how much drama there was at his birthday last year. Sam was having an argument with his parents because they wouldn't allow him on the Ferris wheel, so he got very angry and ran off with temper. He ran outside of the fun fair and was walking along the road sulking. He suddenly noticed a car driving slowly beside him, and the window was pulled down. A weird-looking man dressed in a black suit stared right at him with a weird look and said, "You're next." Sam got chills up his spine and turned and ran back into the funfair. He saw his sister with his parents. They were talking to a cop, and Sam's dad saw him and told the cop, and they walked over to Sam. A couple of minutes later, they were all sitting eating popcorn when Sam's dad said, "Well, I suppose it wouldn't hurt you riding the Ferris wheel." Sam's mom looked at her husband and said, "What?" Sam couldn't understand why his parents were so against him riding the Ferris wheel, but he was happy he was going to ride it, so he just jumped up and gave his parents a high five and shouted, "Awesome!" Sam walked over to the Ferris wheel and waited in the queue. When he got to the top of the queue, the man selling the tickets looked down at him and said, "You're next." It was the exact same man in the car. Sam ran away from the wheel and up to his parents and shouted, "It's him! It's him!" Sam's parents both said, "Who?" Suddenly, Sam's dad made eye contact with the man taking the tickets. The man turned and ran, but Sam's dad took chase after him. Finally, he caught him and said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The man said, "You know what happened with this wheel this exact night last year." Recognition came to him right away. It was the father of a kid who shared the same birthday with Sam, and they were at the fun fair last year. The man could see it was all coming back to Sam's dad and walked up close to him. In the background, their Ferris wheel was on fire. The people on it were screaming and shouting as they stopped it. The man purposely set fire to the wheel, and it was meant for his son. The man screamed at Sam's dad, "This very night last year, you and your silly wife offered to take my son to the fun fair to share his birthday with your son. What did you do? You let him go on this messed up Ferris wheel and he fell out from halfway up. Lucky he has survived, but do you know he has nightmares every single night?" The man got out a gun and pointed it at Sam's dad, but there were several policemen nearby shouted, "Drop the weapon." The man was arrested, and Sam, his sister and parents went home and decided next year to celebrate his birthday at home. Henry was down on his luck after years of alcohol abuse and running around with different gangs. He started when he was about 8, beating up a poor innocent bystander for him to do some sort of gang initiation. As he grew older, he got more into the gangland lifestyle, but drugs and alcohol took his soul with everything else his demons were destroying. He was walking down the street one day and sat down and started drinking to pass a few hours away. People always walked past, getting on with their busy lives. He didn't ask people for money. He was still into petty crime and muggings here and there, so that's how he funded his drug and drink habit. He wouldn't blame people passing him. He knew he was the type that people would no way like to meet down a dark alley, and they wouldn't be wrong. He would stab a person for $20. With all that said, he was very surprised to see a man dressed in all black stop and ask him was he okay. He spoke to Henry for about 5 minutes, and Henry told him he used to be a builder, which was partly true. Henry did do a bit of building here and there when he used to run with gangs. The man seemed to be impressed with Henry and offered him work. He told Henry, "I have a job for you to make some money for yourself. I need a new house built out in the countryside, and I would love you to build it for me. I will fund it all, of course, but one thing, please don't spare anything. I will foot the bill, so I want the best of everything in that house. The best heating, the best bricks, or whatever else it takes to have the best of the best." Henry's face lit up, and he said, "Of course. I know all the best ways to make the best house for you. You'll have the best house in town." Over the next few months, Henry was building the house and was given a nice sum of money for doing it. He put his idea into plan by asking the man for money for the most expensive ways of building the house, but keeping most of the money for himself and building it the cheapest way he could. He spent the extra money on drink and drugs and partying every time he wasn't building the house. He also took his time building it to stretch out the money he was getting from the strange man. A few months later, the house was built, and Henry told the man he didn't spare anything building the best house he could for him. The man smiled and said, "Henry, you were so good and such a great worker. I must congratulate you. The reason I told you don't spare anything building the best house is because that house you just built, Henry, is all yours. You can move in today if you like." Henry was beating himself up inside, knowing that if he had known the house was going to be his, he would have used the man's money for the best of everything. A few weeks later, Henry was in the kitchen, drinking coffee, when he suddenly noticed a leak in the ceiling. Suddenly, the roof caved in, and the whole house fell down, burying Henry under the rubble. It was rural Ireland, and Patrick was really looking forward to make his first Holy Communion. His friends were all talking in school about wearing a really cool black suit or brown suit, but he heard nobody speak about a white suit. He used to love watching the old gangster movies with his parents, and they all wore white suits and really cool patent black and white shoes. He was very poor, and his parents couldn't even afford a suit, don't mind say a really cool white suit like the ones he used to watch in the old gangster movies. His mom knew a woman called Breda who used to make dresses, suits, cardigans, jumpers, etc. Patrick asked his mom to ask Breda how much would it be to make a white suit like the gangsters used to wear in the movies. Breda gave a price which he would be years saving up if he put away every single bit of pocket money he earned, and he knew that wouldn't work. 1. He had to buy food for school. 2. His communion would be long over by the time he saved enough money to get the suit made. Finally, when he was telling his dad's friend, he was given a chance to make his dream become a reality. Joe, his dad's friend, said to Patrick, "Well there, boy, you sure have your heart set on this white suit. What is it, nearly 2 months to your Holy Communion? Well, why don't you help me out in the factory? We make chairs, tables, and all sorts of really nice furniture." Patrick's face lit up, and he said enthusiastically, "Gee, sir, that sounds a mighty swell idea." Joe said, "Well, ask your mom and dad, is it okay, and I can get you started in the next few days." Patrick's parents thought the idea was great and gave him the go-ahead, but made him promise to finish any schoolwork he had before he started his workday. Patrick finished school at 2:30, had his homework done by 4, and went out to work at 4:30 every day and finished at 7:30. He worked Monday to Friday and got around Joe to give him an extra day on Saturday where he worked from 9 to 1. After the first week, Patrick was exhausted. He learned how to use the saws and the cutting machine, etc. One day, while cutting a piece of wood for a table, he was feeling exhausted and his eyes closed for a few seconds. Everyone was startled and looked around. Patrick fell on top of the saw and there was blood pumping out of where his arm should have been. The saw cut his left arm completely off. The blood squirted on people as they came to help him. Patrick was sent to the nearest hospital and was depressed knowing he had his arm cut off, on top of not having any money to buy his white suit. He was very withdrawn in school when he went back, but his friends were very supportive, apart from two bullies, Fred and Gary, who seemed to be evil. They used to bully him before his accident, and they didn't stop after. Since the accident, Patrick didn't feel right. Something was strange. He had a beautiful dream and wished it happened in real life. To his shock, a day later, his dream became a reality. The dream that became a reality was that word got out around the community about his accident, and it made the local and even national newspapers. Word got out, and Patrick was thrilled one day when a parcel arrived for him. His mom called him and told him. He opened it up and his face lit up when he saw that it was a really cool white suit, just like the one he wanted. The next day, 3 parcels arrived with white suits, the next 5, and by the end of the week, there were hundreds of white suits sent by people who heard about the story on the news. Patrick was thrilled, telling his friends at school about the suits, and said there were so many they all had to be kept in their shed. Unfortunately, the 2 bullies, Fred and Gary, overheard him. They had planned to sneak into the shed tomorrow night, which would be Friday night, and throw red paint all over the suits and cut them to shreds. Patrick was really excited looking through all his white suits before going to school. It was sports day, so Patrick played different sports and had fun with his friends. Fred and Gary were unusually quiet. That night, Fred and Gary were putting their plan into action, and they both planned to have a sleepover and snuck out of their house and went to the shed in Patrick's garden. They were delighted to see it wasn't even locked. Fred whispered, "See, I told you, who'd want to lock a garden shed?" They both opened the door, slow, ready to throw the red paint all over the suits and cut them to shreds. As the door opened, they both screamed as there was a huge bang of his dad's bear trap, trapping the boys' legs. They screamed in pain as they both had their legs caught in the bear trap his dad brought over years ago from his hunting days in America. Patrick walked into view wearing a white suit, feeling like the gangsters in the old gangster movies. He held up his dad's shotgun and pointed it at them and said, "Now I really feel like a gangster in those old gangster movies." The boys were screaming in pain, and Patrick smiled, thankful of his new quality. Since having the accident, he dreams of his future, which gave him the psychic visions of the 2 boys breaking in, ruining his suits. The boys tried, but couldn't figure out how he knew what they had planned. Patrick and his parents could not understand that when he woke up the morning after the accident, his arm was right there where it was ripped off the day before during the accident. He wore a cast in school for the next couple of weeks to avoid having to explain what they can't even explain. Jake were having a difficult time in their marriage, they decided to take a train journey across America. What Julie hadn't known was Jake, her husband, only organised the journey to organise a hitman to kill her on the train. Julie was sitting down reading a book, while Jake said he was going to get a drink in the train's bar. As Julie was reading, a man sat down next to her, introducing himself as Andy, and asked her for the time. Julie found it strange, knowing these days anyone should have the time when they have a phone. The man introduced himself to Julie. This was all part of Jake's plan. 15 minutes later, Jake had arrived, and as planned, he told her an old friend of hers was in the next carriage. He recognised me and was asking for her. Of course, there was no school friend. The plan was that the hitman pushed Julie out of the train door when she went to see what friend. Jake hoped she'd take the bait and smiled when she did. Julie walked towards the door. Jake would have loved to have watched it happen, but knew it would be too obvious. The hitman was wearing gloves and an aesthetic face, just in case there were cameras they missed scoping the train out a few days ago. Jake had planned to walk up to the next carriage in about 15 minutes to get clarification the job was done. He was about to walk into the next carriage when the man said, "Hi sir, nice journey, isn't it?" Jake smiled, knowing those were the exact words he was meant to say. Jake replied, "Is the job done?" The man said, "Well, I got to chat a lot with your wife. She seems a very nice lady," but most importantly, he was looking behind Jake's shoulder at this moment. Jake turned around to see what he was looking at, and with his shock, he saw Julie staring at him with hatred in her eyes. The man continued to speak. "More importantly, your wife. She seems to be a very sweet lady, and may I say a very beautiful lady." Jake was dumbfounded and said in a confused tone, "What's going on here?" Julie spoke. "Let me explain. And this hitman here who goes by the name of Andy, which I call Andrew, is not just a regular hitman. We have been dating for the last 6 months. Wait, should I change that to we have been having an affair for the last 6 months?" And she gave a sinister smile. Jake didn't know what was happening. He spoke quietly so no other passengers could hear him. "What is happening here? How do ye know each other?" Andrew explained. "When you first made contact with me, did you not realize it was me who first made contact with you?" Jake still couldn't understand how a hitman he hired on the dark web could have been having an affair with his wife he ordered to kill before he even made contact. Jake said, "Wait a minute. You said you made contact with me first." Suddenly Andrew said, "Well, we told a tiny lie, but it's not about me making contact first." With that, Andrew pulled off his prosthetic mask, revealing the face of their marriage counsellor they had for the last 6 months. It was Andrew and Julie were having an affair, and because of Julie not trusting her husband, she checked his phone one time when he left it on the bed for 5 minutes while he shaved. Just as he left, she picked it up in order to not have to put in any code that she knew she wouldn't be able to guess. He'd just been on it, so she didn't have to put in any access code. She went through it and came across a text that said all the information and money needs to be transferred to this email address. I will have the job done once the money is sent through Bitcoin to this account. Julie had no idea what it was, but sent an email saying, I will send the money, but I need to know exactly what you're going to do. I need to know exactly every detail of what I'm paying for." Julie changed the real email, so no matter what email Jake sent would not get sent and would not be received by the hitman. But she changed it by adding a dot that was barely seen. But Julie kept contact and brought the hit forward, of course, with the real hitman thinking he was in contact with Jake. Julie had been on the train waiting for the hitman to arrive, and when he did, there were undercover police ready to arrest him as soon as he asked for the time. They waited until a guy with a prosthetic face of Jake clarified with the hitman did he finish the job. Then the undercover police moved in. The real Jake was shocked to learn that the hitman was arrested a week ago, and he was going to be arrested now. Julie looked at him and said, "You son of a bitch." Hi, my name is Susie. It was Friday night and me and my friends were invited to hang out at my friend Sarah's house. Her parents weren't home. We were watching a cool, scary movie when Sarah had an idea. She suggested we use a Ouija board that she found a few weeks ago in her attic. I was kind of freaked out as I didn't like to mess with the unknown, but I didn't want to be the odd one out, so I agreed. We all sat around the table like you'd see in horror movies, and Sarah was holding the planchette, asking were there any spirits in the room. It was me, Julie and her boyfriend Warren. I remember the light going out, and I initially thought that they were all just playing a prank on me. I felt like, here it goes, making a fool out of Susie again. But what happened next could not be explained. All I can remember is waking up on top of a grave in the local graveyard. I have no explanation how it happened, but worse again, it was so hard to explain to the police without them treating us like we murdered Sarah and Warren or something. I was being questioned in an interrogation room and worried they thought I killed them or something. I could see that the two policemen were talking outside the door and knew maybe if I could walk up next to it, I could listen. I walked over to the door and listened. What I heard next made me freeze with fear. I heard one of the cops tell the other, "These kids are playing some sick joke with us. That kid Warren they're talking about, his dad was involved in a hit and run this morning. It didn't even make the papers. But wait for it, you were off duty so you might not know. The person his dad ran over in his car is this Sarah girl they're talking about. She was killed yesterday morning." I tried to make sense of how Sarah asked me and my other friends to her house when she was dead. Then it hit me like a Mac 10 truck. Sarah was dead when we were using the Ouija board, and she wanted to use it to bring us all over to the other side with her. But it did not work with me or Julie. But unfortunately, it worked with Warren, the son of the man who killed her in the hit and run.